Fellow gardeners, I need to share something that completely transformed my approach to growing food and flowers. After years of religiously applying synthetic fertilizers to my garden beds, convinced I was doing everything right, I discovered I was actually working against nature's most fundamental systems. The moment I stopped reaching for those bags of NPK and started working with the soil instead of against it, my garden exploded with life in ways I never imagined possible. If you've been following along with the Soilsage Chronicles journey, you know I'm all about discovering the deeper truths beneath our gardening practices. Today, I want to challenge something most of us take for granted, and show you why stepping away from conventional fertilizers might be the best decision you'll ever make for your garden. When I first learned about the microscopic universe living in healthy soil, it changed everything. We're talking about billions of beneficial bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and other microorganisms in just a single teaspoon of soil. These tiny workers form complex relationships with plant roots, trading nutrients for sugars in an intricate dance that's been perfected over millions of years. Synthetic fertilizers disrupt this ancient partnership in devastating ways. The high salt content in most chemical fertilizers actually burns and kills these beneficial microorganisms, leaving your soil biologically sterile. Think of it like taking antibiotics every day of your life. You might get a quick fix, but you're destroying the very system that keeps you healthy long term. I witnessed this firsthand in my own garden. For years, I noticed that despite regular fertilizer applications, my plants seemed increasingly dependent on more and more inputs. They'd look great right after feeding, but honestly, they'd quickly yellow and struggle between applications. What I didn't realize was that I had created a cycle of dependency by destroying the natural nutrient cycling that should have been happening in the soil. The soil food web is, well, incredibly sophisticated. Mycorrhizal fungi extend plant root systems by up to 1,000 times their normal reach, accessing nutrients and water from areas the plant could never reach alone. Beneficial bacteria convert atmospheric nitrogen into forms plants can actually use. When we dump synthetic fertilizers on this system, we're essentially telling these microorganisms they're not needed, and they respond by shutting down or dying off entirely. The result is soil that becomes increasingly lifeless and compacted over time. Without the sticky proteins produced by soil microbes, soil particles can't aggregate properly. Water runs off instead of infiltrating. Organic matter breaks down without being properly cycled back into the system. You end up with dirt instead of soil, and dirt simply cannot sustain healthy plant life without constant artificial life support. Here's something that really shocked me when I first learned about plant nutrition. Plants need over 60 different nutrients to thrive, but most fertilizers only provide 3 nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. It's kind of like trying to live on just vitamin C, protein powder, and carbohydrates while ignoring the dozens of other nutrients your body needs to function properly. This oversimplified approach to plant nutrition creates serious imbalances that actually make plants more susceptible to pests and diseases. When plants receive excessive nitrogen, they produce lush, soft growth that's like candy to aphids, spider mites, and other garden pests. I used to think pest problems were just part of gardening, but, once I stopped over-fertilizing, these issues largely disappeared. Even more concerning is how synthetic fertilizers can lock up other essential nutrients in the soil. High phosphorus levels, for example, can bind with iron, zinc, and copper, making these micronutrients unavailable to plants even when they're present in the soil. This creates deficiency symptoms that gardeners often try to solve with more fertilizer, perpetuating a frustrating cycle. So, the timing of nutrient release is another critical issue we need to consider. You see, synthetic fertilizers tend to dump massive amounts of nutrients into the soil all at once, without really considering what the plant actually needs at that moment. It's kind of like force-feeding someone their entire daily caloric requirement in one sitting, Plants just can't process these nutrient floods efficiently, and this leads to luxury consumption of some elements while others remain deficient. Nature's approach, on the other hand, is far more elegant. In healthy soil ecosystems, nutrients are released gradually as plants signal their needs through root exudates. These chemical messages attract specific microorganisms that then break down organic matter and minerals to provide exactly what the plant requires, precisely when it requires it. This kind of biological precision is simply impossible to replicate with synthetic inputs, no matter how sophisticated the formula claims to be. Now let's talk about the environmental consequences of synthetic fertilizer use, which extend far beyond our garden boundaries. As conscious gardeners, we really need to acknowledge our role in these larger ecological problems. Every time we apply synthetic fertilizers, we're contributing to one of the most serious environmental crises of our time: nutrient pollution. Excess nitrogen and phosphorus from fertilizers don't stay put in our garden beds. They leach into groundwater supplies and run off into streams, rivers, and eventually coastal waters. This nutrient pollution fuels massive algae blooms that consume oxygen and create dead zones where aquatic life just can't survive. The Gulf of Mexico dead zone, which can grow to the size of New Jersey, is largely attributed to agricultural nutrient runoff from throughout the Mississippi River watershed. The production of synthetic fertilizers also carries a massive carbon footprint. Creating nitrogen fertilizer through the Haber-Bosch process, well, it requires enormous amounts of energy, typically from fossil fuels. It's estimated that producing nitrogen fertilizer accounts for about 1 to 2% of global energy consumption and contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions. Every bag of synthetic fertilizer we purchase supports this energy-intensive industrial process. In my own community, I've seen how fertilizer runoff affects local water quality. The creek that runs through our neighborhood shows clear signs of eutrophication during the growing season, with excessive algae growth and declining fish populations. Knowing that my gardening practices might be contributing to this degradation was a wake-up call that pushed me to find better alternatives. The wildlife impacts are equally concerning. Synthetic fertilizers alter soil chemistry in ways that affect earthworm populations, beneficial insects, and soil-dwelling organisms that form the foundation of healthy ecosystems. Birds that depend on these creatures for food suffer population declines. The interconnected nature of these ecological relationships means that our gardening choices ripple outward in ways we're only beginning to understand. The solution isn't to abandon plant nutrition entirely. It's to work with natural systems instead of against them. Composting is the cornerstone of this approach, and I cannot overstate how dramatically it will transform your garden. Good compost provides a slow-release source of all the nutrients plants need, delivered in perfect balance by soil microorganisms. Making compost might seem intimidating at first, but it's remarkably forgiving once you understand the basics. You're creating conditions for aerobic decomposition by balancing carbon-rich materials like dry leaves and paper with nitrogen-rich materials like kitchen scraps and grass clippings. The key ratio is roughly 30 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen, but don't get too hung up on precision. Nature is incredibly adaptable. I maintain 3 compost bins in rotation, allowing me to have finished compost available throughout the growing season. The finished product isn't just fertilizer, it's a living ecosystem that inoculates your soil with beneficial microorganisms while improving soil structure, water retention, and nutrient cycling capacity. Cover cropping has been another game-changer in my soil-building journey. Instead of leaving beds bare between growing seasons, I plant nitrogen-fixing legumes like crimson clover or winter peas.